Well, first of all, I love seeing your face. I love meeting up in
Thanks.
our new clubhouse that is Substack. Uh, I named my Substack permission granted because so many say, "Oh, you gave me permission," whether it was a death loss or a non-death loss. That I somehow you have it in you, but somehow when someone says, "Oh, that's grief," and this is a world where we're not very grief literate, where we don't have a lot of places and spaces to talk about grief. I started my grief because of that. Really, I lost my mom in 1993, and no one said grief or grieving
Right.
anywhere to go for resources. And so I made a very small circle as a peer guide, and my work grew and grew. And I think the most interesting part about it is that it can be joyful and it can be inspiring and you can use your creativity. It's just that you have to show up for it. And sometimes we think that showing up for it, we may never stand up again, but that's what I'm all about. How can we process and learn to live with loss over this very long arc that we learn to live with it? Doesn't go away, finds you if you don't meet it. We'll talk about all those things. I think you and I see so eye to eye on giving this a platform, a stage, a conversation. And I'm so
Yes. I would love to start with, so I want to let everyone know you're a grief coach. You have a lot of experience, as you said, firsthand with going through your own grief and then helping determine those factors that keep people stuck in it. And in therapy, we call that complicated bereavement, complex grief. There's a few terms for it depending on if you're referencing the diagnostic psychiatry manual or the International Code of Diseases, I believe. But one thing I think would be amazing to start off with is just how would you draw the line between what we would call, I guess, neurotypical or standard grief, and then the kind of grief that you see that's just sidelined people and is causing them greater distress than we would expect. If you want to talk about that a little bit.
grief is energy that we have in the body experience when we experience any loss at all. So we don't express it. We don't have a way to move it forward. And sometimes it is because we have nobody to talk to or nowhere to talk about it,
Right.
any movement at all. So I would say, the diagnostic makes me happy and also makes me a little miffed because I think we all deserve to have grief support. And so if the diagnostic that allows us to get it paid for, by all means.
Right.
But also, I think societally, we just don't do a very good job bring their whole 360-degree self. That means with grief on board to our workplace, to our families, to our friends, so if this is a conversation that we can't have, it's going to get stuck or sticky, as I say, in the body. If we don't have a place to put it, where will it go? And I think sometimes we do have grief that's associated with trauma, and I think sometimes that trauma can also live in the body. Nobody names it. And so if we don't have a way also of having treatment, of expressing that, of someone naming it for us, we might be really frozen in our grief. Like we can't get out of bed. We don't know how to ask for help. We're not going to work. If you are not in acute grief, I would say in the first year, you're going to experience all kinds of things. And you may have days like that. If you begin to have weeks and months like that, you need to ask for help. And help means therapy, and help means a therapist that is grief literate and a therapist that might be trauma informed. Those are kind of buzzwords that I think we don't know to ask for. We just think therapy is therapy is therapy. Many therapists, most of the medical field, don't have any course along their training in death and dying and bereavement. So maybe a lot of that needs to change. There's a specialty that many have. And so I always say, yes, you want to be with somebody that understands your grief. Or people that good if they are not grief informed.
That's a mouthful. I agree. Say that. That was chopping up a little bit with your audio there for me, and it might be my internet connection. You want someone who's grief informed and trauma informed.
I mean, if someone can name if you feel so stuck that you are not functioning, and when I say stuck, I mean you're not functioning on the daily tasks of living. Acute, and right after you lose a loved one, or maybe even a job or a relationship, you may have days that feel really overwhelming and down. If this goes on for some time, and maybe you can name what you think that timing would be, but I think that's a call for needing help. If you are not being able to do the day to day activities that you are used to, now change. Some will change. Returning to some of the things that you used to love in the before, they may change. We're always we're always hearing that people are like trying to get back to normal. This will be a line in the sand. My friend Gina Maffa calls the grief fall, which I love. It's like that
I like that.
that moment where life changes from whatever that, inciting incident, if you will, changes you from what was in the before to what was in the after.
I absolutely agree with that. It's like the ICD code says, so the International Diseases Code says it's 6 months after bereavement is how long that has to go for it to be complicated grief. I'm interested in your view on that, the prolonged grief disorder. I mean, it has to involve intense pain, inability to experience positive mood. So I think you just described it very well. Of if this is eclipsing everything and causing you daily living activities, complications, or causing you to be able to not fulfill them, you can't live daily life. Then that's a real call to action. I think you bring up another amazing point that Natalie Martinek, who's here on the call as well, has talked about, and that I get on my soapbox about, of therapy is not therapy. Of you go to a doctor and you get an x-ray for broken bone, you're going to get the same typical treatment. Like, you go, your bone's broken, you think, you get an x-ray, but you go to a therapist, you get however many different models of treatment for depression or anxiety. It's not uniform, for better or worse. So trauma informed treatment is coming under fire now for being kind of bubble wrap therapy, I'm going to call it, like therapists saying everything is trauma. I saw something yesterday about that. Basically, I'm like, well, that doesn't mean trauma doesn't exist. It means maybe the people have gone overboard with what they label that. But that's like saying, anything, like, something doesn't exist because people see it everywhere. It's like, that's not true. So I would love to hear, and this is going a few steps back, but I've got a lot of stuff to follow up and ask you. But you talked about needing to have support going through grief and people who know how to talk about it in therapy. I would love to hear what, in your experience and your model of coaching, is helpful for people to say to someone who's going through grief. Because we know what's not helpful, and you can even give examples of that. But I think people don't know as much what's actually helpful to share in the midst of grief.
Always looking for the right thing to say or the right thing to do. I think I always say, here's my advice: the cook cooks. So if you are a cook, you show up with the food. You don't want me to cook for you. Survive. Show up as your truest self. I remember supporting who lost a loved one. I show up as a listener. I'm a really good listener. I can sit down with you on the couch and we can do absolutely nothing, and I can listen. There are other people that are like the people that show up and are the doers, and they can run things off the plate of the person who's experiencing loss. And don't say, is there anything, if there's anything I can do, let me know. I would say that is the number one biggest mistake. It sounds so well meaning and so well wishing and so kind. The griever doesn't know what they need. They wouldn't even begin to know. Asking for hard. It's hard. So I say the best thing you can do is show up as you. If you are an errand person, you say, I am going to walk the dog. There are groceries on your front stoop. You coordinate with all the people around to get maybe gift cards. If you're a cook, by all means, drop off some comforting food. Maybe ask the family, is there anything you're allergic to? If it's me, I show up at your door. I show up at your door probably with a book of poetry. I might drop it in the mailbox with a note. I don't drop off a grief book or a journal in early grief. People have stats that are also like a super well-meaning thing. And I am a huge proponent of writing through grief, and we could talk more about that later. But if you're sitting in front of like the big open road of not knowing what life looks like, and somebody gives you like a new blank slate, this journal, heard this was new, here's a journal and a pen, it can be so daunting and so overwhelming. Showing up, showing up, showing up. Not saying anything is unacceptable. So you can say, stinks, this sucks, this is a mess. Any sentence that starts with at least, just zip it. Just zip it. No, at least they live long. At least this, at least. That's all bright siding the grief and really not allowing the griever to just be with whatever it is that they are sad and upset and stressed about. Just let them be. Sometimes we just have to like be in the suck with them.
Yes. Yeah, I think there's the term accept the suck, and I think it might have or embrace the suck. I think that comes from the military. I want to attribute it properly, but I would say I think the Western world that we're in has a real problem with, I mean, to be blunt, embracing negative emotions. We don't like that. We don't like a vacuum of positivity. And so when that's felt, I think people rush to fill that with, cheer up old sport type dialogue. And I mean, in the Middle East, there's intense grieving ritual. And of course, people can carry their culture with them. But in America, there's really a focus on not staying in emotions for a long time. I mean, unless it's certain emotions that are involving entitlement and stuff like that. Don't get me started. But I think there's a lot to what you're sharing of don't start by positively reframing it. And as a therapist, people might think that's wild for me to say, but it's actually very helpful to be able to say, well, right now, it's not the time to start sweeping under the rug or avoiding or going into the positive, because you might actually just be avoiding stuff that will come up later.
Yeah.
Grief wise, I love where you're going with this. And people can be well intentioned but say hurtful things for sure. I see that a lot. I hear that a lot from my own clients, and that's another overlap with grief and trauma. Is family basically saying, "Hey, you're going to get through it," but in a way that's a little more, I guess, assertive and, "Hey, pull yourself up by the bootstraps."
And it's really hard for us to see people we care about in pain, right?
Yes, great point. Yes.
Fixer. And I think it's really hard to just let folks be. Just let them be. And now that's not to say that it wouldn't cheer them to do some of the things that we were just expressing, like taking some things up their plate, drive, but shoving, positivity up their bum is really tough. And it changes friendships. It really does.
Yes.
You're looking for like your friend before their grief happened. Allow them to be and allow them to find out who they are on the other side of this amazing line in the sand, this grief fall for them. Allow them to see what it is on the other side, like who arrives? What is this new identity? And can you befriend it and accept it in yourself and in others?
Like that. I'd like to hear more on that when you say, what is this new identity? Can we accept it? Do you mind expounding on that just a little bit?
Sure. I think we're all new on the other side of grief. Now, of course, it's you, but I'm just saying with grief comes tremendous learning. Sometimes
Yes.
it creates a new sense of how we live the rest of our lives. Our mortality has been tapped, and we think, is this really important? So it sort of shakes up our idea of what's important. Is that at our job? Am I spending so much time at my job and no time with my family? And now I'm realizing family is the thing that changed my life. Sometimes I encourage folks after a loss to do an exercise that's called like more of an emotional will, like something that you write down that's like an ethical will, where you sit down. You say, what is it I wish to be remembered for? Because sometimes we'll be standing at somebody's funeral, even the funeral of our loved one, and we will hear how they were remembered, all their accomplishments, all their accolades, but really how much they were loved.
Yes.
Those were the last things we told him. We told him we loved him. We told him he was a great dad. It was all, that's what we want at the end of our life. What sounds do you want to hear at the end of your life? Probably someone saying, I love you. Voice of someone who loves you. Like think about all of the things at your end of life. That's an ethical will. What do I wish to be remembered for? What are my values? What are my hopes and dreams and desires for my people that are part of my future that will live on beyond me? And then when you look at that list, you think to yourself, is the way that I'm living aligned with the way that I just wrote what my values are. Like, if you wish for your family to like continue Sunday night dinners because it's so meaningful to you, but you haven't been to one in so long because you're at the computer or scrolling on social media or, whatever that is. If it's really important to you, it sort of shakes up this opportunity to reframe, redirect, reimagine who I am with this grief on board. Maybe it's a more sensitive you. Maybe it's a you that only has the kind of friendships that really support you just as you are. Maybe those shake up. Maybe family relationships shake up. Even within a family, we all grieve differently. So you may find because our relationship with that person is different. So
Yeah.
I just think you get a chance to sort of re-examine what looks important, and it shines a light on that so much more because you realize, okay, life is short. It may even have been the longest of lives. Might have been a grandparent that lived to 101, but look at how they lived their life. Am I living my life that way? So some of it's just like a big deep look in the mirror.
Yes.
That gets reflected back to you, and I think it sort of shakes it up. Also, maybe we were lost a partner and we are now solo. So that identity is shifted too. Who am I to the world if I am no longer part of this partnership and I'm flying solo? Or if I've lost, how is my motherhood different? So all of these are sort of queries and this like loss of identity in some ways, and also
Yeah.
maybe new parts of our identity that we gain.
Like that. I mean, just to reflect in doing trauma work, again, another parallel, when people are abused when they're younger and they lose a sense of innocence and they really don't like their child self, that's a lot of work we have to do there. Because if you hate the biggest, the most long haul clients with trauma that was really complex are the ones that hated their child part that lost its innocence, right? And so we have to look at what's lost through trauma and build that, rebuild that, and honor it. Like, yeah, we're not going to gaslight, oh, things were great, let's pretend they were great. No, like, let's rebuild though what it looks like to protect your inner vulnerability. I'm also hearing what you're saying is, okay, so you've lost a part of you that had a certain role, like as a wife or as a daughter to a mother that passed away. How do I honor that role and reinvest that energy, as Freud would say, reinvest that psychic energy somewhere else, honoring, of course, the loss, and then making a new story and finding a new way to have that part of ourselves integrated into something.
And for me, it took many, many years to not feel like it was a betrayal to my mother to figure out how to be remothered. Where did I feel mothered? Where did I feel held? Where did I say that they went to their primary for a checkup? And when they went to put the stethoscope on their chest, they put their hand on her shoulder. She just started weeping. She just experienced recent mother loss, and it had been a while since someone held her. And I said, those are the times that we recognize we've not only lost mother, but we've like lost that safety net in the world that sometimes comes with parenting and sometimes comes with the past that we're letting go. And so we need to figure out, how do we reckon with, like you said, those parts that need to be nurtured in a new way or known in a new way, not in a bad way or a good way, but just discoverability, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's really hopeful and realistic, a way to look at grief and the invitation to do something new there. Just very rich. And I would love to direct our conversation a little bit to any myths or in honor of our past together on Clubhouse of talking about myths and facts on grief. If there are any myths about grief or things that you encounter that you have to dispel, um, that you think would be helpful to share with the audience. Yeah.
Number one thing probably is that there are stages of grief. And while I think that there are,
No, I lost your audio.
can you hear me?
Now I can. Yeah. Let's roll that back. Okay.
The stages of grief, I often feel people think that we can sort of knock them out, right?
Yes. Hierarchical, like levels in a video game.
Like levels in video. And we want to if we could gamify grief, man, I'd set you up for winning for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. There's no way, there's no way out but through,
That's right.
that is the truth. So I would say, we wish we wish there was this hierarchy. We wish there was this like one and done or this magic pill. Like just show me how I can get over this. So I would say first, I don't believe there's over. I think there's learning to live with loss. I would say that that's probably one of the biggest myths, that it's a long arc. So also, I think for the stages of grief, which you may or may not know, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance,
Yes.
and for some, making meaning, those were created for the dying. And
Right.
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross
Yeah.
created them for those who were terminally ill. We adopted and adapted them because we wanted, I think, a framework for naming the feelings that we had across this long arc. Also, as you said, so we could game the system and like, okay, I'm in anger, I'm in denial, I did it, I'm done, that we could. So I think I hear the stages bandied about often.
Same.
Kind of like, because people have sort of glommed on to that idea that it's not that they're not real and they're not true and they're not part of grief. It's just that if you touch on all of them, which you will in your grief, you will not be done. You will not. And so some people are like, she didn't know what she was talking about. But they don't realize that the origin, she was like a genius in her field, that we don't realize that the origin was really about end of life and death and dying, what you grapple with when you have a terminal illness or disease. So I would say that's probably the biggest. And also that you'll be done after the first year. Like I hear that all the time. Once I get through the first year, you think all the first Christmas, the first anniversary of the loss, the first this, the first Mother's Day, the first Father's Day, the first whatever those are, you think you'll get through those first. I actually think it's completely different. I think you'll live it over the long arc. You will meet it where you can. It was impossible for me to meet things in my 20s that I can meet in my 50s.
Yes.
Examining and re-examining it, because you can only meet it with what you know on this day.
Bingo. Brilliant.
So I don't go on. There are so many myths. I mean, that most bereavement policies, like in the workplace, give you 3 days.
Yes.
The grossest myth out there is that anybody could do any bereavement of any meaningful kind, including making a ritual of any kind, whether it's a funeral or a memorial or a ritual of any kind. What could you do in 3 days that could possibly serve your grief?
I think that's a brilliant point. And I mean, as you bring this up, it makes me think, well, I've had a massive amount of overlap in my career with clients who have grief, like with what you work with, and trauma. And also, when working with grief, it's almost like a sort of planetary model where you've got, you're the planet and you orbit around, and the grief's like the sun, and the sooner it comes, or you could reverse it and say the grief's like a moon, and across a year, like it comes closer with holidays and that person's birthday anniversaries, and then it moves away more, and then it cycles back, and then it gets closer and closer, and then it moves away again. It's how I've seen people experience it.
It's true. It's kind of like we didn't even see it coming, and we'll feel something in our body and we don't even realize, oh, it's the death anniversary. But that could be like 4 years down the road, 3 years down the road, and our body still remembers, like, oh,
Yes.
and so too is that December when I lost them, and so too is the holidays without them, and sort of we kind of feel it, right?
Yes.
And we ebb and flow, and I think also when you're saying about how it orbits,
Yeah.
also get further and further from it in some years where it's just sort of like this soft whisper, and then all
Yes.
little bit louder around those hallmark days, if you will, or anniversaries. So I always say it's really good to plan for them.
It is. You nailed it.
Yeah. And another nice thing you can do is you write down the day so that you know that a dear friend is about to experience the second, third, and you help them remember.
I agree with you. Be aware, it cut out for me, but I could read your lips. So, like when people come up at anniversaries in your life that are important to them of loss, like be aware of that with them and for. I mean, that's beautiful. That's true friendship or romance.
Put it on the calendar. I think the first thing
Yeah.
I read that someone's passed, I literally put it on my calendar. Even if it's just checking in by text, year one, remembering them and also saying their name. Their name. That's my big one.
Yes. Talk about that. I love this. I was going to bring it up if you didn't. This is amazing. Okay.
In the beginning days of my personal story, I used to say, sorry, my phone is ringing. They got to get this like on the computer so we're not on our phones.
I think it will. We'll see. Please, Substack, help us.
Any room, any in so long, it started to upset me. So I started to say, I lost my mom, Ellen. She died suddenly in 1993 of a brain aneurysm. That was a story that I could tell that I felt like was factual, but also brought her name into, made her a person, not just a death, made her a very living human being in my life. It opened up so many beautiful conversations and also started when someone tells me their story, I say, tell me her name, tell me his name. And inevitably they pause because they can't believe they get to speak it.
Yeah.
They share their loved one, and it is so beautiful. It inevitably opens story. Tell me something about them. My aunt will often say, oh, I had an Aunt Ellen. Like somebody would tell you like a story. I love that name. They should bring that back. And so I'll often just say, as a nice thing to share over and over again, is whenever someone says they've experienced a loss, tell me their name. Tell me their name. Let's just normalize that so that we can speak their name into conversations. Kids lose a parent, and the other parent will say, we're not going to talk about them anymore because it's going to make everyone sad. And their name is never spoken again, sometimes photographed, and it's just the saddest ever thing. We want to talk about our loved ones. Everybody wants to talk about it, even if they had a difficult relationship with their loved one. They want to talk about that too.
Yes. Yes. The ups, the downs, the good and bad. Yeah. I mean, it's like you're telling the person who wants to talk about it that that's something shameful, and you're pathologizing the grief and saying that's something to really conceal and bury. And I think that's its own form of like a micro trauma. Like, I'm carrying around grief, but I can't unload and unburden it.
It's like a second death. You're asking them to, like, the person is not gone. The person is just, it depends what you believe, but I feel like I keep her memory alive. I'm the keeper of her memory. I'm the keeper of my father's memory. I'm the keeper of now knowing all the things. And if I don't keep those stories alive, who will? My children feel like they know my mother because I have told them so many stories about her, and she was long gone before they were born. And I think that is the best way I could possibly honor her and honor them in their knowing a grandmother they never had. We call her Grandma Ellen.
That's beautiful. I think that's an absolutely wonderful way for people to understand their legacy. We're so untethered now in America, and I think to different degrees, depending on your cultural background and what you can draw on for death rituals. And like that's not even a death. That's a legacy. Like you're talking about the person recurrently. It's way more complex than just a one time thing, which is what people get a lot of the time with passing. Man, this is great. I'd love for you when it makes sense. Because see, this is a good possible segue. You're talking about how to verbally keep alive someone that matters to you, that mattered to you, and how that looks now. If you wanted to talk about how that kind of dovetails with the journaling or the written work and what that looks like, that's very healing for people, I'd love to open that up to you.
Sure. Before I did this work, I was a journalist. And for most of my life, even since I was a kid, I made sense of the world in like a little pink diary with a hard book. There is so much good science now about why we write, what happens to the brain. When we write by hand, the part of the brain that we use, which we don't use much anymore, screens and keyboards, responds in healing. So just coming to the page and moving your hand across the page helps us just do some bilateral movement. Just moving our hand across the page helps us get centered emotionally. neurologically. I often will say, put the pen in your non-dominant and see if you can write from them. What message do they have from you? And when we slow down by using our non-dominant hand, we can often find this amazing connection. We are all born intuitives. And so I firmly believe that if we like tap our intuition and our inner knowing and really try to connect with our loved ones, we know their innate advice. So that's just one area. The other is there are several protocols. One is called the Right to Heal protocol that James Pennebaker made famous and tried and true and tested, scientifically tested with blood work, for goodness sake. And knowing that it helped us writing right into the darkness of the thing that is troubling us the most. A very special script is read, and we either do this over the course of 4 days or we do it once a week over the course of 4 weeks. It is the most profound experience to just write right into sort of like right into the center of the tornado. It would seem counterintuitive that that might trigger something or bring up something, but it actually releases in a place that feels very safe. And sometimes it's always in our words spoken. You know, sometimes that can feel really scary. We write it on the page. We not only allow it to move through us in a way that is needed, but we become our own story witness. We see it, and in turn, we can see like all of that was living inside of me. So I always say, don't if the intensity of a practice like nothing else has worked and you come to that because you really need to release this heavy burden that you're carrying, if you just set a timer for 4 minutes and do something called an automatic write, like sometimes I would say, just how was my grief today, or dear grief, and just go for 4 minutes. Sometimes light a candle before of your own ritual. Someone saying poetry is remedy. Sometimes I'll go on to like a poetry app on the internet and press a button where a poem will be read to you. And sometimes there will be like one line that just like washes over you. Talk about reparenting and remothering. Being read to is so comforting of us, and it's been so long since that happened. It's like closing your eyes and letting the words sort of wash over you as somebody reads a poem to you or even reads some audio story. Maybe a line of that is expressive, and you take that line and you use that as a jumping off point to write. There are so many writing prompts, they're everywhere. But one of them also, I always think it's really rough, even though there's a lot of science around it, to ask someone to write a gratitude list. I know a gratitude practice is something that a lot of people use their journal. I think it's asking such heavy lifting for folks to write a gratitude practice while grieving. Like, what should I be grateful for while this horrible thing has happened? However,
that's a lot, isn't it?
but I love a list of delights, a list of delights.
Amazing. Yes.
10 things have delighted you today. That's the list that I would ask you to make maybe before bed. Just so we have some noticing of like, if you had like a big black piece of paper and I poked just a pinhole in it and the light came through. I feel like that's what delight is metaphorically. Like we just know that joy exists and more joy can exist. And so just writing down these small delights, which seem like really easy lifting, we notice that we can delight more in life. We are of the world and in the world. And even though we feel lonely and alone, perhaps in our grief, when we realize we're back in it, right? We titrate into our life, put feet on the ground and see beauty and lift our chin and open our hearts a little bit. I think just even that, there's so many ways of using your journal to express what can't be spoken.
Yeah. Seeing beauty again is something I'm kind of taking away here. And just that huge sea change between get grateful for something and kind of the command there versus the invitation to witness delight, to experience delights. That's what that really is, experiential. Witness beauty, feel something positive. That's all such a great paradigm shift for people who are just in the throes of grief and in that phase of not wanting to betray their loved one. And I think that's just amazing for people to hear.
And also the reminder that it might not be like that 24/7. Like we're happy again, right?
Right.
If I touch joy, I could touch it again. If I touch delight, I can touch it again. If I touch happiness, I'll touch it again. So to me, it's also a reminder that it's there and it will be there again and it can be there.
So something you've said a lot here that was tremendous, and I'm sure we can clip it and have that be a great highlight. One of the things is there's that fear that when we bring up the emotion, there's going to be that triggering and it's going to be destabilizing. And I think this actually hits at a lot of, yeah, Geraldine, you're welcome. I'll edit that out, probably me saying that. So there's a fear that we're going to somehow lose control, and I think that's actually the very thing that a lot of people find disingenuous a lot of trauma therapy culture. Even though that's not real trauma therapy culture, it's kind of the counterfeit that fraidy cat people can have, like therapists. I'm saying often avoidance is a far bigger issue than over experiencing, except with PTSD, where you have those flashbacks. But we teach people to avoid sometimes. I think that's really detrimental. We were talking about that kind of at the beginning here, that you really have to notice the loss rather than say, no, 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 I'm not listening, la la la. So I think people are really stronger often than they think, and being able to face the grief and make sense of it, being able to write. I love that you added the bilateral of the pen, the paper, turning the paper. I love that, obviously, as an EMDR therapist. But I think going through writing and and doing the meaning making there, if people hear one thing, that's really crucial. And we don't need to live in fear with that. And because it's going to come up some way. Like, of course, you don't have to run right into the storm during the acuity of the loss, but at some point it is necessary, if you really want a full range of emotional experience and not avoidance, to go back and clear out, whether through writing or therapy or whatever, what hasn't been emotionally explored.
Right. To metabolize something that you might not even know. I always say, like, what's in the basement?
Yes.
What's at the very, I always think of it as like silt. Like, what's the stuff after you shook it all up that like lands, but you haven't really dealt with?
Yes.
That's what I think. And for some people, the practice might be finding that silt by coming to therapy. For others, it might be coming to the page. So for all of us, or going for a run, like for all of us, it's going to be different where we have that like moment where we're like really ready to investigate, interrogate, reckon with. Like it'll be there. I'm curious from you because I've heard lots of different answers. I'm curious from you about whether you think all grief is also trauma.
So I'll give a short answer. I would say no, and here's why. Here's why I would say no. And it might be a language game to people. So if you want to reserve trauma for a maladaptive reliving of something, so when you are trapped, okay, and in danger. So I'm drawing from Peter Levine, the guy who I mean, he's very prolific. He did quite a few books, and he also created somatic experiencing therapy, where you kind of release the trapped impulses. For everybody out there who doesn't know him, he's a neuroscientist who's done a lot of books. Check him out. But being trapped and in danger would be my definition of trauma. Now, people can consider something like betrayal trauma, like an affair. Is that a life threatening trauma? No. Is that a developmental rift? I would almost consider that a form of grief, the betrayal trauma. Because, see, these words get thrown around a lot. Grief, the reason I'm not calling grief trauma is I think we have to look at grief as so intrinsic to the human experience this side of heaven that it isn't something that is an abnormal. I consider a trauma to be abnormal. It is, and not to the victim, the person who survived. It's not their fault, but something was done to them that didn't register in the brain as over. So they relive it. It comes up. It's upsetting in a way that says this could happen again often. There's a future element to it that says, I'm unsafe. I have to protect myself because this could happen again. Grief, it's not that. It's this person's lost and I'm lost and don't know what to do. Even complicated grief. It doesn't destroy, unless trauma's with it, your ability to live for the future, because you're not thinking this thing could happen again, or it was my fault that this happened to me. All the lies that accompany trauma are different than the ones that accompany grief, unless, again, it was war and you didn't act quickly in your mind as a troop, as a soldier, and you lost a comrade. That's traumatic grief, is loss and survivor's guilt. but see, that's trauma. So I would say grief, like, let's say best case scenario of it is your parent passed away from a long life and you were there and it's sad. I can't consider that traumatic because it's an element of the human lifespan that isn't something done to you actively by nature or a person.
And yet some of those examples that you said, like maybe you thought there was something else you could do. Maybe you could CPR, but you were there. So maybe it's a traumatic incident,
Yes.
but all grief is not trauma. I have heard that. So I wanted to dispel it because I wanted to hear from you what you thought. I think there is some trauma in sudden loss.
Absolutely. That's I actually wanted to get to that, but didn't want to derail you. So sudden loss versus prolonged illness loss. Again, feel free to riff on that. I love this.
I'm just it's more my curiosity because for many years, one day your mom is there and the next day she's not there. How do you
Right.
do it? Like, how do you reckon with that? And I never named it trauma for myself because I thought that was reserved for a big traumatic, incident, and it just didn't seem it just didn't seem like it to me because we can often compare, and people do compare loss. They compare the hierarchy of grief. They lived a very long life. Oh, that's so lucky if you had them for 8 years, 18 months. Like there's so much. I always say there's no grief Olympics because people often say to me, what's the worst grief? What's the worst grief? It's yours.
Yes. Very well put.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what you have to reckon with. It's yours. But we also often compare. And I'm always curious when folks relive the way that like their loved one looked at the end of life. And they can't get that image out of their mind. It was like tubes and beeps and decisions to make. And, I think of that being very traumatic. And their body after that experience, only they can come to you and you will help them know.
So, no, I love that. And that's a great conversation. I appreciate that. I'm going to actually say one thing that I wish I'd said earlier, which it's still in the same podcast, doesn't matter. So, trauma is the way the brain stores the event. So, that's how we as therapists cut through with the machete, the vines and the weeds of terminology. So one person could be trapped in an elevator for 3 hours and come out of it with a story and laugh at it. And they just talk about it at parties. One person could be trapped in an elevator, hyperventilate, have horrible reliving symptoms, and it be something that they need to go to therapy for. Well, what's the difference? Well, it's the way one person encountered that as being trapped and being unsafe. And so people have different thresholds and different resilience levels. And that's a long epigenetic nature and nurture conversation. But when you're talking about, I mean, it's morbid to think about, but you see people hooked up to cables and to things, and you have to make decisions. And we have so much involved in that now. And that's so upsetting and anxiety provoking, blah, 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 blah. And then you think back to, okay, maybe if someone is passing away in a home with their family and it's simpler and the loved ones don't experience that as trauma because of the surroundings and the level of meaning there and the feelings of responsibility. So it's what goes into the experience that makes it traumatic or not the action. And this is similar to the idea of wanting phases to go through for grief. We want terms for every kind of event. And the problem is the brain filters. So one person's brain is going to say, this is traumatic. I'm afraid of it happening again. Another person's brain can say, I know that was a one and done event and it's over. And I don't give that rent-free space in my brain. So it's hard to tell without knowing the person.
And would you explain, because this is how EMDR has been explained to me, that it's kind of a person's brain that has been in the elevator and it becomes a traumatic experience, and you open that like a file cabinet and you
Yeah.
reimagine it. It kind of explained to me from your point of view, like I wonder how some people say like that story lives on loop in my brain. Like I can't remove that imagery or fear. Or what could EMDR do for a griever that
Great question. I love this. So I put it this way. So we have a lot of different ways we think EMDR therapy works, and two big ones are that it taxes your working memory. So the same way if I open up my computer, like 20 tabs, and try to play 20 different YouTube videos, they're going to go slower. Why? Because the computer's memory, the RAM for a computer word, is being taxed so much that it can't multitask on all that. So with the EMDR therapy, we are, moving our fingers, trying to have the client follow that, or holding these hand buzzers that are very tactile while they're thinking of the trauma and trying to stay in it. So we want them to have one foot in the traumatic memory, so the anxiety of that, and we want them to have one foot in the present with us. And we're stretching that memory to say, okay, try to focus on it, but also you're here and you're safe. You're able to follow my fingers. So that's in essence a working mechanism. Encounter this memory on your terms. You bring it up in as much detail with the thought like I'm unsafe or it was my fault. The emotions, you take all those elements, emotions, cognition, sensation, and you pull it up with the therapist's guidance, and then you move through that. You notice it, you see what comes up as you notice that memory and the finger movement. It's not hypnosis. The finger movement isn't to evoke a trance, it's actually to do the opposite, where it's keeping you on a task in the present. So the way it could help someone, and I've explained this to grievers, is another way we think EMDR works. So the Stanford neuroscientist Andrew Huberman used to think EMDR was a joke, and then he dug into the research on the eye movement circuit that it was connected to, the bilateral, and he saw, oh, well, the brain, the same activity of that eye movement from EMDR is active when you're walking forward and looking at your environment and noticing that you're moving forward, meaning you're engaging your environment. Have you heard this before? That's very powerful because you're saying you're moving forward. So what can I do for grievers? Well, I love that you used traumatic flashback in your story there. We take the flashback, we say, okay, give us that thought. First, give us that flashback that you're seeing, and then the thought that goes with it, like it was my fault, the emotions, the body sensations, and then let's move through it where you try to focus on it. Because often what happens in trauma is it's biphasic, it's dual phasic, it's extreme reliving and then extreme efforts to avoid it and block it out. And so it actually that energizes in a vicious feedback loop of I don't want to think about it. Now I'm thinking about I don't want to, and you become memory phobic. And so EMDR says, okay, let's pull out as much of that memory as you can deal with now and move through it and teach your brain not to fear it that it's over and to reprocess where you notice the connections. We say, what are you noticing? We bring up have the client bring up the memory, and then we say, okay, take a breath. What are you noticing? Okay, go with that. And so we chop the memory up like 30-second chunks of the person being in it. Or if they need more time to access it because of ADHD or whatever, or focus issues, maybe a minute and then check in a minute and then check in. And so it's not prolonged exposure where you have to sit and white knuckle it. It's interrupted exposure. So it's very good at saying, oh, well, it's done now. And people will have spontaneous insights like, I really did do all of what I could. I didn't know then, now what I do about how I could have helped. Of course, I didn't know any better then. And you get insights like that where people recognize, wow, okay, I was being really hard on myself. And I did what I thought best or what I could. And I loved my mom. It's not my fault. That kind of stuff comes up all the time with EMDR therapy because you're thinking about it on your terms with stimulation that's different.
Such a gift because then you can remember them forward without that. That kind of, to me, that keeps a lot of people very stuck in their grief and they can't memory phobic because you don't want to go there. You can't remember their favorite foods, their favorite holidays. They're like all juicy stuff that will help you, because I think even the word remember, putting yourself back together too. You can get all those things when we dip into memory. But if memory feels dangerous or you're memory phobic, I fear that you can't create a continuing bond or a way to keep the memory alive and keep them with you, even in this new form.
Yes, man, that's brilliant. It's very rich. So, this was a great conversation. You and I always chop it up really well and have a lot of fun. As we close it down here, let's see, different way to work with patients. Trauma happened years before or in childhood. Amazing question, Janine. Short answer. During childhood, people often blame themselves for the trauma. And it's a lot more of that plateau that was my fault. And so I often look for that. I don't suggest it. If there's trauma that happened in teen years or adulthood, it's usually more about safety or, well, I can't do any better or choose any better. There's a whole plateau, different plateaus. And actually, that's really great. Follow along. And Janine, I will do more conversations about trauma itself and answer that in details. This was more about grief. And there's still so much to talk about. So, Barry, where do you want people to follow you and check out what you're up to these days? Here on Substack, obviously.
Granted, but also at the Memory Circle Lots of free resources, a free grief relief kit, lots of free stuff over there, lots of groups, lots of writing stuff. But
Love it.
first of all, thank you. And I want to interview you more about trauma.
Let's do it. Yeah, absolutely. We speak the same language too, with all the similarities to trauma and grief. It'll be dynamic. So thank you so much. Got to run. Great tight 1 hour interview, chock full. I encourage everybody. I'm gonna post it. I'm probably gonna on my end edit some stuff, and I'm also gonna take some clips, and you'll have a copy of it too in your drafts as well, Barry, to do with what you wish. So thank you so much. This was amazing.